Welcome back to our new episode of Trauma, Drama, and Life. My name is Ben Taylor.
And I'm Kayla Taylor.
So we're excited to be here just to talk with you guys again. So we've had a couple people that have either emailed in, different questions or responses, or have commented on a couple different posts just asking thoughts, opinions, and sharing stuff about our lives. So if you want to be able to interact and be able to, send us some questions or some things you'd like to hear on the podcast, feel free to email us. You can go to rawmotivations.com. There's a contact form there, or you can click on just do ben@rawmotivations.com just to give us some ideas. And as far as we're here to try to be able to share a snapshot into our lives of what's transpired over the past several years and kind of where we are now and what that looks like.
Yep.
So a lot of people have been asking in social media and different things about love, and then particularly like, how can I love my wife, because as being a narcissist, I'm incapable of love. And like, what does that actually look like now, now that I'm putting out there who I am, kind of what's going on. I had someone just the other day that like commented to be like, I hope that what was it? It was, I hope that she leaves you and finds someone who will really love her.
Mm-hmm.
That was the comment. And so, hearing different things like that, it's interesting, not just from my perspective of like what I'm thinking about it, but also then to get like even your take of like, what does that sound like to you, or what resonates with that, when people make comments like that.
Yeah, I think it's hard because now seeing the change and how he does show that he loves me now, it's kind of hard to hear those comments. Like, I 100% would agree with them if they would have said that like a year and a half to 2 years ago. Obviously, like that makes 1,000% difference, is because you've changed and you've done like a complete 180. But it goes back to people often, I think everybody has their own definition of love. Like some people base it off of feelings, and if you're basing it off of feelings, then I don't think that you're ever gonna truly find love. And I think that that's kind of how you were basing love off of for several years, is off that feeling and that high of like, this is what I need to achieve, is that high and that feeling like all the time. And that's why you would go from like person to person to person to person to person. And
I think there's definitely an aspect of like, I viewed love as like a high. I viewed it as being, like someone or anyone in one sense having that type of affection towards me, but not necessarily that it was towards other people. Like there would be aspects of, love bombing or, wooing a person kind of a thing, but there wasn't like an aspect of, let me invest in this person, or let me, show up for this person and it be loving for that person. It was more or less getting love from that person. Yeah. It was more, I wanted the high of someone loving, adoring me, of, it being all about me, that aspect, versus there being a two-way street of love going back and forth.
Yeah, and I think that it goes back to basing it off of like the love that you had for me at the time was pretty much non-existent, but the times that it quote unquote I would have thought that it was existent, it was more conditional. So, if I was acting a certain way, or if I was not confronting you about things, or if I was trying to do X, Y, and Z to make you happy, then like it would give you that short high of like, I would adore you.
Getting something out of it.
Right. And so, but if I went back to like, if I needed something, or if I needed whatever, like it was like, it wasn't like that unconditional love. It was like, okay, it's conditional, so I'm now going to remove myself from the situation, like,
well, at that point,
and shun you, essentially.
At that point, you weren't being loving to me because you're inconveniencing me.
Right. And so, that's in your words. I wasn't purposely inconveniencing you. Let's clear that up.
Yeah,
but like,
no, I mean, it was from my perspective.
Right.
Like how dare you get sick and mess up my life?
You expect me to have empathy for you while you're sick? What?
Right. Well, I mean, empathy, that's a whole nother topic. But I mean, that's a huge aspect of the love, was more of a high and more of what I wanted from another person, not necessarily something that I would give. I mean, in the relationship, especially like early on, that was something that you felt love for me, because I think that's a lot of times what people get confused about is they're like, wait, is the love real or not? And they're wondering, the relationship that I just got out of, was any of it real? And I think it's important to show that it's real for the person, like it's real for you.
Mm-hmm.
Like you had real love towards me, but I wasn't demonstrating any love towards you. I was just grabbing up all the love and being like, thank you very much, appreciate it.
Right.
Like
Like,
it wasn't,
yeah,
yeah, it wasn't me showing it.
correct. So I think that goes back to at the time, like he wasn't showing love like the last several years. And it wasn't up until really like he started making those changes and investing,
Mm-hmm.
you know, into changing, and then also in return investing into me. And I think that we've touched on it in one of our previous podcasts of like I was taken aback by it because I was like what is happening? Like this has never been who he was, and so I was like, is this just kind of a tactic to get me back? But like he never had done that the whole time that we were separated, really, until the end when like he really did like ask me to come back and like try to make this work. And so I was like, is this like some type of like thing to get me back?
Right. Was it like another like Hoover, another way to be able to trap you?
Correct.
Whenever you left, were you thinking and kind of like wondering through, like, was any of it real at that point? Or did you feel like that betrayal as far as the love aspects? I know you'd already known about the affairs at that point for a
Right.
little while. And then, like, you left when I was in therapy. So it wasn't
Mm-hmm.
like you left because I wasn't doing, quote unquote, the work. It just wasn't actually changing.
Right. I think that there was at times that I did question if it was real or not, but at the same time, in those moments, it felt real to me. And whether or not it was not real for you, I couldn't sit there and dwell on that because then that's obviously going to eat away at you, even like eat away at somebody even more.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes back to the book that I read by Lisa Turkster, Forgiving What You Can't Forget. And there's a section that goes, and then she talks about how she would question, like, if the memories that she had with her now ex-husband, um, if they were real or not. And she had to put in her mind of, like, in that specific moment, whether or not he showed her true love or whatever it was, those moments are still real for her and she enjoyed those specific moments. And I think that helped me have some healing of like, I can't sit here and I can't analyze the entire relationship or it's going to eat away at me at the core.
Mm-hmm.
And there has to be a point, a pivotal point to where you pick yourself up off the floor and you start healing for yourself, because you can't live in a place of being entrapped in your thoughts and your mind of the what ifs or the analyzing and everything else. And I'm a very analytical person and I am a very logical person, so I analyze a lot of things, but I knew that in that moment I just had to take and say, I know at least for the past 2 years 100% that he has not loved me the way that he should. That is what I know. There have been moments that I've quote unquote maybe felt love, and whether it was in my delusion or whatever, I'm not going to analyze those moments. I'm just going to take it and I'm going to start my healing.
Mm-hmm. Like really just, I mean, that's a big aspect that we try to promote on the platform, and also in like the coaching that I do is telling people about like getting back to the truth of like understanding like the truth of the situation is at the end of the day, it what matters is that demonstration of love or that
Mm-hmm.
demonstration of what the person is doing. And so even when we walk through that process of trying to help people like rewire their mindset, it goes into depth of like the truth of the situation of like how do they actually demonstrate it, because if it's not real, like if it's not being shown on a consistent on a day-to-day basis, then it's not real. And a lot of times people want to latch on to just those positive moments or those little moments and think of that. And I think as you were talking, I was thinking of like the idea when people start analyzing, okay, did he love me, did she love me, like how does it actually work like that? I think there's a huge part that is harmful for them when they do that, because they normally ascribe their worth based on if the other person loves them,
Mm-hmm.
right?
And I think that it goes back to based off of the society that we're in today of like social media and
Mm-hmm.
getting all kinds of likes or comments or whatever on a post or whatever it may be, and then you associate those people liking your comment off of your worth. And
It's
so
like
it's
validating.
yes, and so it's
Mm-hmm.
the same thing with like basing one person if they loved you or not off of your worth or your value or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And again, we can sit there and we can analyze that if we want, and we're going to stay in a place of not healing ourselves and not being able to move on and just in this like place of like bitterness and dwelling and whatever it may be.
Yeah. And I think that's huge because so many times people put their worth based on what another person thinks or what another
Right.
person says or if another person validates them. And as a result, I think that's why a lot of people stay in toxic relationships longer and why they struggle to get out physically, mentally, and emotionally because they're still attributing their value and their worth as being determined by another person.
Mm-hmm. So it's like almost the concept of, well, if I just do X, Y, and Z, he's going to like me more or love me more or her or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not the case. Like, because in one sense, their love is conditional, or if they don't have anybody else and they're off over here and they're not getting the attention, but you're giving the attention, then that's when they're going to come back and you're going to think that, oh, they love me again, when really they're just waiting for that next high or that next person to come along and validate them even more than you are. And then they're going to be swooped away by them and do
Mm-hmm.
that. Yeah.
When did you feel like it changed for you as far as like your worth not being defined by how much I loved or didn't love you?
Um, I would say it changed really when we separated, because I think up until we separated, I struggled immensely with just like all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think also like diving more into like my faith and like God, and just realizing that my worth doesn't come from a person. Like my worth cannot be set in a person, because people are always going to disappoint us.
Mm-hmm.
And my worth is ultimately found in Christ. And so just really diving and taking the blinders off and realizing that my worth is, it can't be based in a person, because people will fail you every single day. It doesn't matter if you're in a healthy relationship or not, that person's still going to fail you. And especially when you're in a toxic relationship, that person fails you like 1,000 times, like over and over and over, by doing harmful things like mentally to you, because they're saying that they love you, but they're doing the complete opposite. And so you're like kind of like disoriented of like, well, what is love?
Mm-hmm.
What is my worth? What is this? What is this?
Right. Do you feel like you had those thoughts in the relationship before you left, but they just weren't like prevalent or not able to like really dive into them until you got away?
Yeah, I think that it just goes back to the trauma bond. Like,
Mm-hmm.
because I think often it just, the when you have that trauma bond, it can be so detrimental, that you have such intense blinders on, and you're just willing to do sacrifice like your mental health, your physical health, your whatever, your well-being for another person, and that's not how it should be.
Right. Yeah, and I think like it's important to acknowledge that it wasn't just time away and it wasn't just like distance away, but it was also you focusing on you, like you focusing on
Mm-hmm.
like where who you were, like where your worth came from, like how that actually is defined versus it being on anyone else. Because there's a lot of people that get away.
Mm-hmm.
And in with the people that I talked on a day-to-day basis, like a lot of times I'll say it could be 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years, 20 years. And I've talked to people on all those different ranges, and they could have been away for that long, but they're still like mentally trapped. They still haven't
Mm-hmm.
mentally broken free of the prison that the narcissist constructed. But then I also think a lot of times the survivors construct around themselves of like self-limiting thoughts and self-limiting beliefs that have been impressed upon them. So I mean, I guess it'd almost be like I don't know, it'd almost be like a mold that's hollow. In one sense, the narcissist kind of like presses on the other person of like you will be in this image, you will be this way, and then they take it off and it's kind of like there and it might be like paper thin, but like the other person doesn't know or hasn't passed those self-limiting thoughts to actually break out of that and realize like the weight is actually not there anymore, because even when they're free mentally and emotionally, it might still feel like that weight is still on them, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. I think that it goes back to, in one sense, you have to find some type of closure, whether you make that up in your head or um, you just come up with some type of different scenario and you just keep telling your
Because you're not
story.
going to get it from the narcissist.
Right, because you're not going to get it from the narcissist.
I didn't give you closure, did I?
No.
What did I give you?
Nothing.
Just trauma, right?
Like, there wasn't any, like, whenever I left, it wasn't like oh, I'm sorry that I did this to you. Like, there wasn't, kind of like, it was just kind of like, okay, well, this is what you're doing, so, okay, see you later. So you kind of just, right? Yeah, so you kind of have to, in one sense, like, it just sounds weird, but rewrite your own history, like, in that little blip of time just to get closure. Like, that's the only time that I'd probably ever say, like, rewrite some type of history. Because
we talk
in
about a lot
EMDR,
of times with, like, I use the phrase, like, rewiring,
yes.
Because it's the easiest to kind of say, like, we're rewiring back to the truth of how they demonstrated versus, like, changing it to a false reality.
So there's this type of therapy called EMDR therapy. It's like eye movement, and it actually helps you process like a lot of trauma. And some things, if you can't get past like processing major trauma, they will actually rewire your brain to believe a different story than what it is. And so if that's what you have to do in order to literally get out of the place that you were in where that mind block, then do it. It's not like you're rewiring the entire, like, your relationship with this person. You're just getting yourself closure, because sometimes people just need that closure just to be able to move on. And you're obviously not going to get it from that toxic person.
Yeah. No, I think a lot of times, like, I'll talk to people how, like, they're not going to get closure from the narcissist, but it comes from them. Like, it comes from them acknowledging, like, what happened in the relationship, acknowledging how that person showed up, because I think that's a huge aspect. Like, before the podcast, we were just curious and we were like, what is the definition of love according to just like dictionary? So we just Googled it just to see. And what it popped up with was an intense feeling of deep affection, or a great interest and pleasure in something. It's like super, like, it tells you a lot there, right? Like, the example is babies fill parents with feelings of love. So like just random, like, fleeting feelings. And I think that's what a lot of people focus on, is like, yeah, the high, the butterflies. And then, like, when I didn't have the butterflies, I was just like, obviously it's not me because I'm perfect, so it must be your fault. Right.
But if you're a parent, you know that you're not going to have those like newly love butterfly feelings for your child. That doesn't mean that you don't love them. Like, because I love my kid more than anything.
But you don't always have butterflies for them.
But it's not like
me all the time.
Right. Like, it's not like I have that feeling of, like, the intense, like, feeling of butterflies or whatever.
It's like when Sophia's screaming at you or, like, drawing on the wall. It's like, oh, these, like, intense, deep feelings that I have affection for you. Like,
right.
Yeah, I mean, and everybody goes through that. And I think people get stuck with the idea of, like, wait a second, there's a narcissist that says that he's still with his wife and loves his wife. Like, you can't have feelings, that kind of thing.
Yeah. And obviously there's a lot of things that attribute to, like, divorce rates, but I do think a lot of the divorce rates are high because people base their love off of feelings versus trying to work through and make connections or whatever. But that's like a side note. But It goes back to, well, do you actually love me then?
Right. And for me, one of the things that I know I've put online and tried to explain to different people is not the fluttery butterfly feelings that, like, come and go, but the actual demonstration of what I do on a day-to-day basis. And it's hard because then I say that and then people are like, oh, well, you're just doing it, like, for her, you're just doing it because of her and stuff like that. And I'm like, no, I'm still not, because with the growth that I'm on and the direction I'm going is going to continue whether you're in my life or not. And so it's just like thinking through, how do I need to demonstrate that love towards you is also part of like my healing process of this is what I'm going to do on a day-to-day basis that I know is not toxic to everybody, and you also reap the benefits of that as far as me not being
Mm-hmm.
toxic and not being, condescending and rude and all that kind of stuff to you on a day-to-day basis.
Correct. It's not, it goes back to, I know like your love for your spouse or your person that you're in a relationship with is completely different than like your kids, but it also is like you show up. How do you love your child? You love them by doing things with them. You love them by providing for them, like cooking meals for them, spending time with them, things like that. So that also all encompasses like love. And so it goes back to that's ways that he shows me love. Like
Yeah, and not just
we
like the physical or emotional or
right.
mental aspect, but also like for the kids, like creating a safe place. Like I got to create a
Correct.
safe place, like mentally, emotionally, physically for you, in order
Mhm.
for there to be a connection formed, or for there to be
Right.
love in between us in that
Mhm.
aspect.
Yeah. Cuz if you obviously come to the table and you don't have that safe environment for somebody, then you're not going to communicate well, and your communication is going to dwindle, and in return your relationship is going to dwindle, and then it's just going to become this like huge toxic like
Hmm.
oozing thing.
What would you say to like all the people out there that are listening to our podcast or watching my videos and seeing the aspect of like, well, he's still married, or they made love work. How does that work for me? Or maybe I can have that aspect of my relationship with the toxic or the narcissistic person that's been in their life.
Mm-hmm. It goes back to just if that's something that you want to stay in, if you want to stay in, I caution you that it 99% of the times they're not going to change unless they actually truly want to get help and to change themselves. So I think that within doing this, like I don't ever want to give somebody like false hope or false like sense of whatever it may be, because I think our situation is definitely different. And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the big things is making sure that the other person's actually demonstrating it, that they're actually not just saying it. Because like
Mm-hmm.
I said it a lot, but I didn't match up with it by how I
Correct.
treated you and by how I cheated and like many things like that. Like I said the words, I said the right words.
Mm-hmm.
It just wasn't followed through with like the actions.
Mm-hmm. And I think it goes back to it was either our first podcast or this past podcast that I talked about how whenever I came back, I took it like a month at a time. And that wasn't like a funny haha thing. I know it is comical when you think about it, but I did because I had already knew the patterns of he said that he was going to change and then he would change for like a week or 2 weeks or whatever and then go back to whatever. And so I came in very guarded. And so he had to work hard at creating a loving, safe space for me to be open and for me to feel comfortable
Mm-hmm.
saying things. And if I'm being 1,000% honest, I don't think it wasn't up until really like over the summer that we could have like we could go into a conversation without me having like some type of like anxiety or like feelings that you were gonna come back at me for
Mm-hmm.
me saying something.
There's like a lot of trust that had to be built up and a lot of
Right.
work on both our parts, and still like the journey is still like messy. Like it's not like
Mm-hmm.
we have it perfect. I
Yeah.
mean, even the other day when we got into like frustrating times together, like trying to express our own vulnerabilities and our own emotions in the moment was like super hard.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's also super hard because we'll lay those out there, and then it's like triggering both people at the same time based on previous experiences, perceptions, and trauma.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So there's like a big aspect of that. Yeah. I had someone that asked on one of the questions that asked like the idea of is it worth it along the lines of being always like constantly on guard? Like how do you reconcile like that idea of basically the feeling of being constantly on guard about me, or how do you process that, think of that? How does that correlate to, coming back for that month, but then, now we're past being like a month back. How,
Mhm.
how does how does that being on guard aspect feel or interact with on like a day-to-day basis?
I think honestly, at this point, I'm not as on guard as I was, just because there's we're almost a year out at this point, and there's been trust that has been built. Um, but coming back, and when I was more on guard, I don't think that it necessarily was like an issue at the time, just because I had grown and I had healed so much, like over the time that we were apart,
Mm-hmm.
that it was kind of one of those things where it was like, okay, if this works, that's great. If it doesn't, that's great too. Like, that's kind of like the peace and the mindset that I was in. So it's like, what is 1 month, 2 months, or 3 months gonna hurt if I have to come back and I would have to pack my stuff up anyways in order to physically like 100% move? What is those couple months gonna like make a difference in a blip of time or my healing? Because it's not, because it's not gonna really do much because I've already made it this far in my healing process. And just if he lets me down again, I have this much healing already under my belt in one
I
sense.
think you're also more like resolute of, if he does this, then I'm out
Mm-hmm.
anyways. I feel like I don't know if it was necessarily like a disconnect, like where you're disconnected from that, or like emotionally like disconnected from it or something, but like the healing process to a point of like I wasn't defining you, so then if I still continued those behaviors, then there wasn't an aspect of feeling stuck, I don't think.
Yeah. Yeah, there wasn't. And I think that, I mean, obviously, I still have those boundaries and I still have those things of if he does X, Y, and Z or whatever it may be, that um,
Mm-hmm.
I would still up and leave. Like, it would be obviously a little bit harder now because, like, we have had all of this healing and stuff and it would suck. But I've still healed immensely from the things that um, I've faced when he was like not self-aware narcissist. And so I still owe that to like myself and my
Mm-hmm.
daughter and future kids or whatever. So
Yeah. And that's future stuff we can talk on
yeah,
podcasts as far
boundaries
as
and
boundaries and things like
things like
that
that. Yeah.
too. But anyways, if you guys liked the episode, please like, rate, and review it. Share it with some people. Just kind of spread the news. We're trying to help spread the news about narcissism, but also just a glimpse into our lives, how we process it. If you have specific questions, feel free to send them to us at rawmotivations.com. You can click just to contact and send an email. You can do ben@rawmotivations.com and send that email just to be able to give us either ideas or questions or thoughts that you'd want to hear us discuss or go over while we're doing the podcast. So thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you again next week.
See you next week.